Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Parallel Event Summit. We are so happy to have you joining us today. We're excited to share and discuss the parallel event model with you, and we have some wonderful speakers that will be joining us today. We do have a slight change to the speakers for our second session today. We also want to thank our gamification partner, Angamio, for providing us a few gamification options for everybody to explore during the gamification breaks. I'm Ron Shaw, I'm one of your hosts today, and I've served in several different roles in the events industry for the last 16 years. Joining me is my colleague, Leslie Bailey. Leslie?
Hi, everybody. Welcome.
So we're here to introduce what parallel events are. Leslie, can you share with us how we're defining a parallel event?
Yeah, so let's jump right in and talk about it because everybody's had this buzz around parallel, and some of us take it literally, and some of us are trying to understand more of the concept. So when we talk about parallel and a parallel event, we're talking about an event format that's designed for digital participants first, with a focus on engagement. So it's modified content from an in-person event that you keep interesting and interactive for a digital audience. So it's all about looking at existing content, not creating two different events, but looking at existing and making it solely for digital and making them your first focus.
So, Leslie, I think one of the things you and I have heard a lot as we've been going through and exploring this and running this through different people to get an understanding is, oh, so that's hybrid, right? So how can we help people define or separate a parallel event from a hybrid event? What's the difference between the two?
Yeah. So when you look at your hybrid, you're technically always thinking of live stream first. That's what you're thinking. You're streaming it to that online audience who couldn't make it to your in person. It's just like an added bonus for them. But what you're thinking with a parallel is how you're making that experience, you're crafting that experience around them. So I'm going to say it. Some people may not like it. Digital is sometimes an afterthought. I know we've all thought it. If you don't want to say it out loud, that's fine. But they're very much our secondary audience when we're talking about crafting our in person. So the hybrid is there to, let's say, appease them and keep them engaged, but it's not crafted around an experience that's solely for them. So that's your bigger difference between hybrid is think of your hybrid as your live stream. It's a benefit to your online audience, and think of your parallel event as existing content that you're taking and crafting it to give them a unique experience.
So I guess the other thing that folks have been asking us or that has come up is why the need for another event type? You know, we've have so many types that are out there now. I think this is where initially part of this conversation started for us, anyways, as we were coming up with this model was from a blog that you wrote. And so you've got digital, you've got in person, you've got hybrid. So now it feels like are we just adding another one in here? What was thinking from your perspective, what was the thinking that we had as we were going into this when we started to develop the foundations of this model?
Yeah, so you think about it and you've just mastered one format, right? And now you have to do another one. And you're thinking you have to bring on more resources and maybe even somebody with different experience. But in all of that, you really don't. You need to look at the certain facets of it, but also look at your team and look at the resources you already have. So we should be learning new formats all the time, right? Because obviously we're getting curveballs thrown at us left and right. We got the pandemic, we got a possible recession, we got travel nightmares that make me never want to go on vacation or do an event again. So you have all these things. So you should be learning these new formats because they're going to help you. And if you're learning them as kind of preventative, you're not reactionary, you're preventing by educating yourself on these different formats you can use. So it does seem like we're throwing out buzzwords, buzz formats, if that's what you want to call them, but it is something you should know because then you can be prepared for your events and you're not bringing on maybe third party contractors to do something that you yourself could do or project manage in a way that you maybe don't know how to project manage. So learning these new formats is also helpful because you have to look at it from the standpoint of if you're continuously getting the same event feedback, especially from online participants, you obviously need to change something. Something's not working for them and the format's not working for them. So while it does seem daunting to keep taking on all these formats, you do need to keep it up to date because we are getting all these different situations thrown at us. And we need to keep these people advocates and supporters of our brand and our content to keep it going, to keep it sustainable. So while it seems like there's always education going on, which in a way is great, right? There's people that maybe know more than I do, than I need to idea share with to learn a new format. But while it feels like you're always adding on top of it, it's really going to be helpful because we are experiencing things we haven't experienced ever or in a long time. So learning this new event format will help you be preventative and prepared to appease all of your audiences, to make them keep coming back.
Yeah, and I think that was really one of the bigger things we were looking at as we were exploring this model is really taking that focus into the digital attendee. We've
Mhm.
seen so much over the last few years, and to give credit, a lot of the platforms and delivery methods have grown and expanded through what we experienced with the pandemic. Um, but it seems as we're coming out of one, we're potentially going into another situation that may have some challenges for the event industry again. We've seen a steady rise to inflation. We're seeing higher gas prices and potentially leading into a possible recession.
Mhm.
And I think most folks that were in the industry in 2008, 2009 will remember that kind of spark from, at least from the platform side, of people going into virtual because the budgets got cut, and things kind of got pulled back. What we're seeing with the parallel event format is that this is going to be, there's another point in time to refocus on that digital experience, because it
Mhm.
may come to where more people are having to attend from a digital side versus
Right.
going in person. I know people may not like to hear that, but I think it's something that we need to look at it as being a reality of something that really could be here in the next 6 to 12 months, depending on conditions and what happens. So Leslie, what else can we expect from the sessions that we're going to have today? What are we driving people? What are the information we're providing people throughout the course of this summit?
Yeah, so we're looking to really just set you up with basic principles and ideas to go forth in your parallel events journey. So, what we're going to look at then in the next session is how you really assess content for taking it digital. That can be a little bit complicated because if you are really stuck in the mindset or you've just been doing in-person events for years, it is a little difficult to suddenly shift and know how to assess or even build content for a digital session and a digital engagement activity. Because as we've seen, group work in an in person setting, it's super easy. In a digital, you could ignore me. You could ignore me right now, and I wouldn't know. But if you do that, you're missing out. And what we're going to talk about is really how to assess that content, especially when it comes to engagement activities afterwards and direct face to face with those speakers, because a lot of the digital attendees miss out on that. They don't get that direct contact with them that in person might get. And talk about how you need to lead by example. So if you are looking for your attendees to participate all the time, you need to do it as well. You can't be disappointed if you don't participate and then they don't, and you're left stuck with what are you going to do now? What new format are you going to do? And then in the third session, we're going to talk about choosing those moderators for engagement activities. So whether it's existing team members or newer people, how you can actually pick out characteristics or personality traits that would make great moderators and keep those people engaged and get them motivated to actually participate. So we're going to go through some traits of that, teach you how to create, let's say, a call for moderators, kind of a call for proposals that you could use when looking for those moderators to really get your engagement up. So, really exciting stuff. We've got really great people with us, and we're excited to give you those basic principles to get you started.
It sounds like we have a lot of great content ready to come. One of the things I want to do before we go into that is I do want to help people get a little bit better understanding of the model of parallel events as we've kind of put it together for us. And that's one of the points I think I want to drive as well to the audience today, is that this is just a formation. I don't want anybody to get hung up on the word parallel, because part of that is, we've had it doesn't necessarily need to be at the same time. It's just in conjunction with a live event. So it means you could be borrowing content from your live. It does not mean it has to happen at the same
Right.
time, which I think that bleeds into more of the hybrid type element.
Yeah, and that's the good thing to understand is it's not literal. You could make it literal. You can always run it in conjunction and parallel with your in person, but you don't have to. What I really want you to take away from this is you don't have to have newer content. You're not reinventing the wheel. You're not creating additional events and work for your team members. You're taking that existing content and morphing it into digital. So that's really going to help you. Like I said, if you want to take it literal and you want to make it part of your in person, you can. But if it's more convenient for you and your team, you can actually host it at a different time.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that we've looked at as we were doing this was it's also the level of engagement. I think you mentioned that a little bit earlier. The way you engage a digital audience needs to be a little bit different, even more so now because before it might be an occasional work from home. There were were some people before the pandemic that worked home on a regular basis, but even more so now. And I think what people have realized is that there are challenges when you have people working from home because there's a lot more that they can be distracted by. So you have to really focus the content and the engagement around those things that could happen to a person while they're working from home. I could get up and I could leave the session running, walk away and go if you don't have my attention drawn in. Or I could be distracted. I could have other things. I could be a parent working from home that has children, small children around that need to address. I could have something that's completely on my mind, like, hey, my laundry dryer just went off, so I'm going to go flip that over. Whereas when someone's at a physical in-person event, they don't have that distraction. So I think, again, to bring it back around, our focus around this is really around developing engagement that is focused towards those digital people that do have distractions, which also leads in, I
Mm-hmm.
think, Leslie, to the next point that we've talked about is making the time or duration of these programs suitable for people that are going to be, have those distractions or be pulled away at a more regular basis.
Yeah, yeah. So to be the prime example of that, in case you can hear my background, I have kids at home. And they are taken care of. Nobody needs to worry that I locked her in a room. She's good. But that's a great example because you are competing with those distractions and the time frame is what you need to make shorter. So with having the option to walk away at any time, if you're holding an event like a hybrid, that's about 6 to 8 hours of content. I'm gonna walk away multiple times during sessions, even sessions that I want to see, because I'm going to get distracted by something else. Whereas if you're doing a shorter duration like this one, 30 minutes of educational content and conversation, followed up by a shorter engagement piece with a break in between, I'm going to be able to maybe go to that distraction in between a break or at a more convenient time than having to leave a session. So your duration is really important because you also have those competing. I mean, even at an in-person, I've got to check my email at nighttime when those sessions and those receptions are over. And I still have commitments that I have to fulfill. So you are looking at those durations to be shorter because then people don't feel like they were investing so much time, especially if maybe the sessions or the content weren't what they expected and it wasn't worth their time. So you really need to look at how much time they're investing, how much information you're putting into one session, and what they're looking for. Um, the other caveat to that is you want to look at how much information you're putting into one session. If I'm putting 100 slides into a 30-minute session, how much are you really going to retain? Probably not a lot because I'm throwing so much information at you. And at that point, I'm probably talking at you because I'm trying to get through all my content and I didn't really engage you. I didn't really retain you in my own session. So when you're looking at duration, you also need to look at how much information you're actually putting into that duration.
So I think that's, yeah, really leading to a lot of what we were seeing, and I think this is from personal examples that both of us have seen throughout our time in the industry. Is we've both seen, especially on the digital side, where those experiences are never fully developed for the audience. They are kind of, like you said before, they tend to be an afterthought in what's happening. There might be a lot of planning, but when it comes to actual delivery of the content, I think some of the things, again, this will come up in later sessions, is how that content is delivered. And this is where, from the hybrid model to the parallel model, some of the things from hybrid, you're just more than likely streaming. You're just direct streaming, pulling stuff out where some things may not make sense to a digital audience, or they may feel unincluded from the conversations happening. Because if you're joking about stuff that happened that only people on site, it doesn't necessarily translate
Yeah.
well to give them that experience.
Yeah, and it doesn't, because a perfect example of that is if you have, let's say, I went to an event a couple of years ago that had Maroon 5 at one of the receptions, and people talked about it. If I hear that on a digital, I'm super disappointed that I didn't go. But I'm not going to get all the inside jokes or, that song or performance was so amazing. I'm not going to be able to engage with you because I have no idea what you're talking about. So you've already kind of isolated me from the experience because you're talking about things I wasn't involved in. Whereas with a parallel, you're making everything about that audience. So everyone's on the same page. They know exactly what's happening. If I tell a joke on this session, you get it because you're here with me and you understand. So you're kind of also giving yourself the benefit of getting rid of that isolation.
And I think to the point there also a smaller these could be larger audiences, but in settings like this, it does allow for that more direct interaction with presenters, which I think I've seen a growing number of digital people that really do want to have that interaction.
Hmm.
They don't want to just, your question's been submitted. They want to be able to know and acknowledge. And I think sometimes I've seen that with the hybrid experiences that the question and answer portion can be very challenging because if you don't have a speaker or presenter that is good at delivering or
Hmm.
acknowledging that virtual digital audience, it doesn't translate well back over it. And also it doesn't necessarily work for follow-ups because sometimes the questions get submitted and you might need to be like, well, can you follow up versus someone in the room with the microphone, you can just say, can you expand on that, please? And have
Right.
them deliver. Where in these types of parallel experiences that we're developing here, it does allow that opportunity for that interaction between speaker and audience.
Yeah, because we've all been a part of it too. And I've actually been one of the in room moderators where it's incredibly hard because questions are coming in fast and furious. You're trying to pick out great ones from the online audience, but some of them are missing words or they typed it too quickly and it doesn't make sense. So you have to go back and ask them to elaborate. And by the time they do, your speaker's already moved on to another topic, another question. And that's where you feel like your question did not get asked. It was not addressed because it was just kind of a discombobulated situation for everybody. And that goes along with the session we're going to talk about choosing your moderators, because I will say a couple of years ago, I partnered with somebody in the room as a moderator and he fell asleep. So no one's questions from the digital audience were getting asked because he fell asleep in the room. So that doesn't work for anybody. While it's great to try to add that so those digital participants feel like they're part of it, that model isn't working anymore for people to have engagement. Whereas your parallel, you can have those moderators, you can have those speakers that are fully invested and know that they are presenting to an exclusive digital audience and they're prepared for that and making it all about them. So that's what that allows for. And it's going to make a big difference, especially as people's preferences start to change for how they want to attend an event.
I think one of the things you brought up before, and this was one of my favorite quotes that when we got added into the first blog there, is share, don't compare. And I think, that is a big point that you've been able to drive through, at least to me anyways, as we've been talking about this is where people are comparing experiences.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, part of the challenge is, can you talk a little bit more about that as to, why that creates a situation in these where it's not the great experience when that happens?
Yeah, it's not a great experience, and it's not useful to you. So if I have somebody going to an in-person, a colleague of mine, and I attended the digital, excuse me, and they come back and tell me all of these networking benefits they had, all these opportunities they had to mind share, and that this session actually had overtime, and I got to go to it and talk to the speaker and get all these ideas. I'm sitting here like, okay, well, that's great. You can try to tell me about them, but I wasn't there. So I didn't get to experience that. And I don't now have the same ideas or motivation that you do to really take my events to the next level. So as you're kind of looking at that, it's difficult because we're all going to share all the time. Now, comparing is a different story. That's when you get into your event data and all your in-person attendees said the event was amazing. I would come back. All that content was exactly what I was looking for. You have a digital attendee who tells you there's poor quality. I couldn't hear the speaker. I didn't know what was going on in the room. This session wasn't exactly what the description said. That's where they're comparing. And that's not useful to you because that feedback then that kind of tells you that you didn't really format it how you should have, which that is useful, but in the moment it's not, because you're having these amazing experiences, but it's a different audience type that's telling you that. It's not a collective. You're not getting some from the in-person and the digital that are telling you they both had this great positive experience and it was everything they could have ever hoped for. So You definitely want them to share, and the comparing needs to go away. And it can. It's just reformatting your thinking, reformatting your events.
Amazing. One of the things that I think I'd like us to talk about and make sure we cover here in the next few minutes is to talk a little bit more about the format, because
Mhm.
what we're set out today is really the format that we're talking about. While we're not pulling this directly from a live event, we have formatted today's program or summit in a way that we are talking about parallel events. So, can you talk a little bit more about how we've broken down the schedule for today?
Yeah, so the schedule, just kind of going back to duration, is there's 3 live sessions total, and they all have an accompanying engagement activity. So the reason for having that engagement activity that follows is to give you a chance to come on camera if you all would like to. I really encourage everybody to. I want to see your smiling faces, and participate with us so we can have more mind sharing, more idea sharing going on. And you can really feel like you were a part of that and you come away with tangible takeaways, because a lot of the time that's what we're missing. We don't really get best practices or tangibles coming away because we're trying to look at your slides and memorize everything on them, instead of taking notes. Whereas we set it up today to be more casual, more discussion focused, so that you can take notes. You can write down questions to ask during the engagement activities. And we'll also take them during the live sessions as well. It's just easier for you to be able to verbalize what you're looking for, especially if you have a follow up question or need clarification. It's much easier, and it's an exact kind of replica of what we're talking about when we talk about face to face direct contact, with your speakers or your panelists. So we've set that up today. Your engagement activities are about 15 minutes. That way, we get enough time to kind of take you through some resources we have for you, but also open it up to have you ask questions and even provide suggestions of your own. That's kind of a bigger part I want to drive home today, is we want to hear your ideas as well. Or if you started to venture into this, definitely share it with everybody, because your experience can impact somebody else to where they're now asking you questions and they want to model something off of what you're doing. So it's just a great way for everybody to take this new format, take this new term, and really share it together, but also customize it to be your own and for your own audience.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point, Leslie. A lot of what we want to do here, it's share. You know, that's why we kind of labeled this as a summit. Is we want to share our findings, share what we've come across out there with everyone else, and really show, hey, here's a model that potentially will really do something well for you. You know, and one of the things we've looked at as we've done this is from a financial or budgetary perspective, is this has the ability to not cost as much as what you would see with typical hybrids, because in a hybrid you're paying a lot to do the streaming. In
Hmm.
certain
Hmm.
cases, great, that's effective, but I know a lot of teams that I've spoken with is that tends to be a big concern around hybrid, is that cost, that streaming cost can become, you know, having the video crews on
Yeah.
site, having the dedicated internet set up, making sure that internet doesn't go down. So this is being able to take some of that content and reorganize it into a more budget friendly fashion.
Hmm.
It's also from a person or staffing perspective, you don't need as much to work this style of event. You don't need
Right.
all of the people that go in. Um, I think we see that there is definitely a slimmed down version of this, to where, you know, agencies like that we work with can help do that. But also from your own perspective, if you're trying to deliver, there is a way to bring that down and have maybe one or two versus a larger team execute.
Yeah, yeah, budget's a really good thing to look for. And you probably have a digital team already, most of you do, that are separate from your in person, which is great because that can be part of what they're doing. But you want to bring your in person people in as well to ask them questions about the content. And we'll get into this in the second session, but you want to make sure things translate well, that it makes sense to put it into a parallel event. If you have an in person event that was very, very participant heavy, like you had to really conduct it and set things up prior, that may not translate well to a digital or a parallel. So you really need to look at that. So bring them in, bring those resources in for ideas, but really kind of really laser focus on that team that you need. You may only need 3 or 4 people. For example, we had 4 people for this event. Whereas if it was a kind of a bigger, we might have a bigger event team to host that, produce it, and plan it. So resources and budget are something that's going to be really important, because you're going to see it's going to be very friendly to you when planning a parallel event.
So, Leslie, as we're kind of reaching our first end of our first session here, one of the things I want to ask, what is it that we are looking for attendees today to come away with? What is kind of that objective that we want them to walk away with when they leave today?
Yeah, so I want everybody to walk away with just the idea of it and a better understanding of what it is. Because, like we've said, we put blogs and content out about it, about what our format would be, about what we would do. But I want you to really start thinking about what you would do and how you can take these basic principles that we're giving you and start that. So you're not exactly starting from scratch. So it doesn't seem like it's so complicated or challenging. You have a starting point. So I want you to take away with that and take away the resources that we have. So those pre-worksheets that you got, those prep sheets, just take those as questions and considerations so you know what you're asking yourself and what you're asking your team and your audiences about what would be a great parallel event experience for them. So in session 2 and 3, we'll actually have templates you can take away and customize for yourself in order to be able to start those principles. So I just want everybody to go away thinking, having a better understanding of this, and of course, asking questions. If you find that you have questions after this, definitely contact us. I'm happy to walk you through it because it is a new concept. And with everybody customizing it to kind of fit their needs, it can get a little challenging.
Well, thank you so much, Leslie. I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up our first segment here. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a brief break, and then we're going to transition into our first engagement activity with Leslie and myself. While we're doing that transition, we do encourage everyone to go over to the Ungameo tab, and there are 2 gamifications in there. There is a map where you can put your information, what type of events you're currently working on, and there's also a crossword puzzle, happens to be my favorite. So if you want to take a few minutes, go ahead and do that, and then we'll see everybody over in the engagement activity.